The next topic is triggers. Triggers are only important for those of you who really measure, use these respiratory parameters. One thing which is crucial there is having your trigger settings right, because obviously the PF300 has to be able to determine the start of your inspiration and the start of your exhalation in order to calculate tidal volumes, inspiratory and expiratory, and in order to calculate all the timing parameters. That's quite clear. Now, how are these triggers, and what are the effect of these triggers? Let me show you first the effect. If your trigger is only a little late, it will miss some of your tidal volume in the inspiration, and it will even worse, it will subtract some of your tidal volume at the end of your inspiration. So what happens, the worse your triggers are set, the smaller your tidal volume is. And what people do many times to try to validate their PF300s is they use a big syringe, a 1 liter syringe, and they pump that 1 liter syringe through, and they want to see a tidal volume of 1 liter, and they never. Because of effects on the trigger. And they're all confused, and I can understand that, but they don't understand the effect of the triggers. The machine has to know when a breath starts and when a breath ends. And we're just about to go to speak about that. In order to create a trigger, one has to select a trigger source. And the trigger source can either be low flow or high flow, or it can be an external trigger. Whatever, a digital signal. And then when we do that, we can even set the trigger on the flow, or we can set the trigger on the pressure. It's like an oscilloscope, right? You have to select which is the trigger, which signal is the trigger, and where do we want to set it. And there is a little more to it. So we can select a trigger level. So we've just chosen, for example, flow as a trigger signal, which in most cases flow is working the best, at least for inspiratory trigger. You have a pressure rise, and the result of the pressure rising is a flow rising even more quick. So we set a certain trigger level, which is not triggered off by any noise, so it should be a little further away from the noise level here. So we usually by default it's set to 3 liters per minute, which is above the noise, but which will not miss much of the volume. So plus 3 liters per minute on the start, and then minus 3 liters per minute on the start of the expiration. And of course, and that's kind of common sense, it should be a sharp signal. So if you have a slush, like a slow rising signal, and you have your trigger set somewhere here, you miss a lot. So it should be a sharp rise or falling signal. People tend to forget that as well. And that can depend a lot on the ventilation mode. So depending on the ventilation mode, you may have a fast rising flow signal, or you may not. You can also choose the edge. Do you want to have a rising edge or a falling edge? So you can really identify very interesting patterns as well, which are kind of offbeat. Whereas this is a perfectly normal breathing pattern, but sometimes on the flow. But sometimes the flow, you don't have the flow, or the flow is offset by whatever leakage. Then you have to use the pressure. And then you have to use the pressure, positive edge and falling edge, but then you might only have one trigger level, which is some millibar above PEEP or something like that. So sometimes it can be really tricky to identify the cycle. Also, there is a thing which is called trigger delay. And trigger delay is to avoid false triggering when you have little spikes and peaks. Trigger delay, like this will be trigger level here. Trigger level is achieved, trigger starts, but the signal drops down again even before anything happened. So this was a no trigger thanks to the trigger delay. Now here the signal goes up and stays up even for the delay time. And then the whole integration keeps going and keeps going. Now, of course, and we can see that here, we do not miss any of the signal. So it already started the integration because it doesn't want to miss anything. Trigger has happened. So trigger starts my volume integration. It keeps going, and here it says, okay, now I've got it, and then it keeps going. You can see those little steps. You can see them actually on the real-time volume curve when you use the FlowLab. You can see those little steps. It just means the delay has passed and the tile volume keeps going. Okay, base flow. If you have leakage, intended or unintended, all your tile volume integration would be the entire blue area, and it will be way too big here, and it will be way too small in the expiration. So you have the possibility of setting a base flow level, which corrects the base flow. Very rarely used. And mostly used are the predefined preset trigger settings. For adults, we have 3 preset settings. One is adult, one is pediatric, and one is HFO, high frequency ventilation. And one of the mistakes is that people are setting or have their machine set to pediatric and are measuring adults, or vice versa. And these are the corresponding trigger settings, which I'm not going to rehash. Is double check that no one has fiddled with your PF300, that no one has changed the standard gas type trigger settings if you use them at all. Or if you're in an optimized environment, like such as production, I think it's a good thing to always resend those parameters to the PF300. 0 with nothing connected, and I think we all agree that the filter, connected filter works, but the caps are not a good idea. Use all the time use filters. If oxygen has any importance, perform the calibration. Thanks a lot, it's been a great pleasure. Bye bye.